like, this is crass, but it could be like, our discovery relatively recently that all of Western culture is based on slavery.
Mm.
And then you think, God,
Mm.
well, all of psychoanalysis is based on misogyny,
Mm.
among other things, but it's pretty fundamental. And then that requires a real radical revaluation of the whole thing.
Yeah, and it doesn't exactly give psychoanalysis good press.
No, it certainly does not. But it also, as you said earlier, it could be a clue about also why it's had bad press, because it looks as though it's entirely mother blaming. That if you've had the right mother, then it'll be fine. This is a really crazy idea, but nevertheless, it's a powerful one. And so there are obviously swathes of mothers who believe they haven't been good enough, and swathes of children who think, if only I had another mother, my life would be fantastic.
But also you can see too how it becomes that self-fulfilling prophecy within psychoanalysis, that for the women who are going through the training, if what you're absorbing, what your daily diet is, your child will be fine if you're good enough, if you're the one who can do all this. It makes you feel incredibly omnipotent, but of course the downside to it is you're murderous too. And that it's all in the balance, that whoever the child is actually becomes irrelevant. It's all on you and what you do. So therefore, if you go through the training, you're taught this. So then as things go wrong with your children, then it's your fault. So then that goes underground because you don't want to discuss that because it's already been absorbed by you, that actually it's your fault. So it just...
You're trapped.
Yeah,
and
the machine keeps going. Yeah.
I mean, it does seem, I mean, you've said it in a way, but it does seem to be the implication of this, that what, as one needs to be analysed is the misogynistic interject. And which would be in everybody to some extent if these development theories are true. Then the question would be, if you've had a well analysed misogynistic interject, what are you then like? Do you have a speculation about that?
In some respects, I do, in that you might be quite an angry person because you've got to find somewhere else to put that anger. But also you might be a lot more comfortable with your own aggression too.
Yeah. Or, much more optimistically, you could be a much kinder person.
Yeah.
Because you will really realize that your mother actually is a person. And she had a history as well, and she's no less complicated than you are. And that she, as you did, she did the best she could with what she had. So there would be, if you like, what would dissolve would be the idea of the evil mother. That we'd assume that all mothers were doing as well as they could in the circumstances. And that all mothers had good reasons for doing what they did, even if they didn't know what the reasons were, that were partly, like all of our reasons, the products of our history. And so it's a bit like, punishing child abuse or having been abused. That's actually what happens. It would be the same thing, except it wouldn't go on. We couldn't possibly intelligently and wholeheartedly blame our mothers beyond a certain point.
But I don't know what you think. I mean, if that were the case, which would be the ideal, wouldn't it? Then the whole game's up, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Because that means then you've got to invest in mothers and you've got to work out properly how society supports women.
Yeah. And you have to have a completely different idea of strength.
Yes. Yeah.
It's no longer about domination.
No, which would have to give up a whole load of power in order to, that would be a societal structure.
But we'd also have to give up a lot of survival structures, like there'd be no more sadomasochism because it'd be irrelevant in this utopian vision.
Yeah, that feels very optimistic.
It does. Yeah, it does. And therefore we should, stick to it as a possibility.
Yeah, I think that's the bit that is difficult in this, isn't it? In that, I suppose it goes back to where this all started for me around menstruation, is that actually if we were to really take on board what half the population is going through or capable of going through on a monthly basis with hormonal differences, and actually where strength lies within that, then everything gets turned upside down. And that's quite hard to manage, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's a radical kind of shaking up.
Yeah.
And also thinking about, well, who needs support and where and why and what that's about. And in some ways, the sort of reclaiming of the anger or aggression, for me, I see that as going into an energy.
Yeah,
Actually,
for sure. It's vitality.
Yeah. That if we actually really addressed our own misogynistic interest, and that's the thing, isn't it? That ideally in an analysis, you would be looking for the person to sort of have whole objects, it's an awful term, but seeing our parents as whole people, not just the bad things that were done or the extremely good things, but you'd see it as a whole picture. And that's the awful sort of realization, isn't it? That you grow up, your parents was just another person.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that we don't want to do that in psychoanalysis, isn't it? Yeah. But yet that's the goal of psychoanalysis.
Yeah.
There's a paradox in it.
Yeah, there is. Because it looks as though it doesn't. I mean, if somebody could produce a pill that cured people of shame, sociability would be very, very different. And we presumably then wouldn't be spending our lives trying to conceal things because there'd be nothing to conceal in that sense. But it's as though in this story, our lives are fundamentally organized by shame. And therefore they're organized by the effort at concealment. And therefore they're organized around self-hatred. And so it goes on. And you could think some of this is really to do with misogyny.
It's not all of it.
Yes, it's not all of it, I agree.
Yeah. In that it's that wonderful place where you can put all that shame, isn't it? It's to kind of go, actually, it's because of X, Y, and Z. You can kind of rid yourself of the straitjacket for a moment by placing it somewhere else that is a usual trope. So you can just go there rather than actually having to deal with it.
Yes. Or if we could stop working at how we would prefer to be seen. This is a tall order, but it is an interesting social experiment because the work that goes into presenting ourselves as we would like to be seen is tremendously powerful. And yet, one of the odd things thrown up with this book is lots of people want to be seen as misogynistic. It's not, you'd think, oh, this is terrible, you try and see it. But no, on the contrary, it's exhibited. And that seems to be a big part of this problem, which is it's like a badge of honor. As though, sociability is based on our shared agreement around misogyny. And if that's true, you'd think, well, really, we're in deep trouble here.
It's the areas where it gets legitimized that I find quite fascinating. And that, as you say, that kind of badge of honor that was very much, Freud and his immediate circle very much was a badge of honor around how women were treated, and and tested Oedipus complex, and that was it, you were out. But it's then sort of mutated into different iterations of that, and when you get into attachment theory, that's when it gets really nasty, but it is presented in a kind of new format of actually we're empowering women, and that women need to be with their babies and they're the sole giver of life to the baby in a kind of very concrete way, and it's observable and you can see it. Whereas it's never sort of turned around as to, well, who's doing the observing?
Yeah.
And what are they wanting
exactly.
to see?
And you can see that in this story, in the attachment story, not only that story, the mother's set up to fail.
Yeah.
There's no way you could succeed along those lines.
Well, no, because if you do a good job, well, it's innate, so you're meant to do it. And so you don't get any sort of, recognition for that. But do a bad job, and it's obvious that you're a bad person.
Yeah.
So you can't win.
Yeah. And also, you can't choose your own description of yourself because the essentialism is so tyrannical. But obviously, A, you're supposed to be a mother in this story, and B, you're supposed to be a good one. There it is. This is incredible. I mean, if anybody said, well, you're supposed to be a dentist and you're supposed to be a good one, we'd be thinking, this is blimey.
But it's that lack of courage that I know most certainly for myself as a mother that I really struggled with, was the get out clause of whether you've got to be a good mother is, it's okay, you just have to be good enough. And I personally was always searching for, well, what does good enough mean? So is that in terms of nappy changes, in terms of interactions, in terms of what I do or say? Because there's plenty of manuals that will tell me that as to how I'm meant to be. But psychoanalysis puts you in this kind of bind of, we don't want to be too good because that's intrusive, and your child might become psychotic because then you'll become merged. But you just have to be enough that it's okay, but there isn't really a definition of what that enough is.
No.
It's one that just matches up.
But if this was a training manual, you'd think it'd be a nightmare.
Yep.
How could you ever qualify?
Mm.
So it's a very, very powerful topic behind this.
And I guess the thing that is striking about it, in that, given that psychoanalysis in most is so it's so, you know, anarchic, it really many ways throws it out. Even if you go back to Freud, look at, you know, psychosexual development and talk about children as being sexual beings, so radical, but yet all this other apparatus around it about what a woman should be is just the same old stuff, and so patriarchal that it's quite astounding to me.
Yeah.
That yet that never gets challenged, really.
Yeah.
And it gets challenged in terms of presenting more about women and what it means to be a woman, and so women join in and write about it. But yet when it comes down to the fundamentals of what does it mean in practice, what does it actually mean in clinical practice too, that hasn't been addressed.
Yeah.
And that is quite striking, I think.
It is. There's a very interesting Lacan says, which I think you know, where he says at one point, the analyst starts explaining at the point at which he becomes frightened of his curiosity. Now you could think there's, and this certainly suggests about the book, we haven't been curious enough about misogyny.
Mm.
We've confirmed it and proved it and justified it and so on, but we haven't been curious enough about it.
Oh, it's a great quote, isn't it? I mean, it really is. And it sort of explains what you were referring to earlier about how Freud on multiple occasions goes, I don't know anything about women, but let me tell you about women. Mm. It's that slipping into explaining, isn't it?
Yeah.
That is really quite striking.
And just a final question.